Hello everyone, welcome to History and Culture. In ancient China, women generally held a low social status. This concept of male superiority and female inferiority not only deeply influenced the social structure but also elevated the notion of female chastity to a value deemed more important than life itself. This ideology reached its peak with the rise of Qingzhou Neo-Confucianism, particularly under the influence of Zhu Xi. His famous saying, "Starving to death is a small matter, losing chastity is a great one," further bound women with the oppressive shackles of so-called purity, leaving them struggling to breathe. In such a social environment, unmarried women who lost their chastity often faced dire consequences. They were unlikely to find marriage prospects, and if they became pregnant and bore children, they might even face cruel punishments, such as drowning in a pig cage. This punishment involved placing the woman in a bamboo cage and submerging her in water until she drowned, a barbaric and inhumane method. Historical records suggest that practices for checking female chastity date back as early as the Han Dynasty, with legends describing methods such as the use of virginity sand. It was said that by applying this substance to a woman's arm, her chastity could be monitored. If she lost her virginity, the sand would disappear. However, such accounts are largely anecdotal rather than evidence of actual practice. As time passed and dynasties changed, considerable effort was devoted to determining chastity. Certain so-called ingenious craftsmen even devised various methods to test whether a woman was a virgin. While these methods were accepted by the society of the time, they were fundamentally severe violations of women's dignity, reflecting a blatant disregard for individual rights. Method 1: Sneezing Wind Test. According to the Ming Dynasty text stories to enlighten the world, one method, called the sneezing wind test, was used to assess whether a woman was a virgin. The procedure involved having the woman remove her pants and stand in front of a brazier. Burning paper was used to produce smoke, which was directed at her. The smoke would irritate her nose, causing her to sneeze. It was believed that if a gust of wind was expelled from her lower abdomen during the sneeze and this wind was strong enough to lift the ashes in the brazier, the woman was not a virgin. The reasoning was that a virgin's intact hymen would supposedly block any such air expulsion. If air escaped, it was taken as evidence that her hymen had been broken. Method 2: Blood Drop Virginity Test. A story recorded in the Qing Dynasty text Chong Ming Man Lu describes a method known as the blood drop virginity test. In this account, a young girl was reprimanded by her relatives for her close association with a neighborhood boy. The next day, her relatives pricked her finger to draw blood, then dropped the blood into water to test her innocence. If the blood coagulated into beads and did not disperse, she was deemed innocent. Ancient superstitions held that the blood of an unbroken virgin had unique properties that caused it to remain intact when dropped into water, rather than dissolving or spreading out. Method 3: Judging by Physical Appearance and Facial Features. In ancient times, people often relied on a woman's physical appearance and facial features to speculate about her chastity. Particular attention was paid to whether a woman displayed certain charms in her posture, which was interpreted as evidence of sexual experience. For instance, in Romance of the Western Chamber by Yuan Dynasty playwright Wang Shifu, it is noted that after Yingying secretly met with Zhang Sheng, the elderly lady detected a change in Yingying's demeanor and concluded that she had engaged in sexual activity. Such judgments were highly subjective, relying heavily on intuition and personal experience. Additionally, some ancient texts attempted to assess chastity through facial features. For example, women with sharp eye corners were often considered overly flirtatious, a characteristic believed to indicate they were not virgins. These notions were steeped in bias and lacked any scientific basis, reflecting the stereotypes and prejudices of the time. Method 4: The Legend and Use of Virginity Sand. Among the many ancient methods for verifying a woman's chastity, The most widely known and simplest was the use of virginity sand, Guangxu. This method is famously mentioned in Qianlong's novel The Heaven Sword and Dragon Saber, where a Mei sect leader Miju Shirtai examines the arms of her female disciples for the presence of virginity sand to determine whether they had maintained their chastity. In reality, this method dates back to the Han dynasty. According to records unearthed from the Mwangdui Han tomb, such as the health preservation formula, virginity sand was produced by feeding geckos, also known as guardians or shogong, with cinnabar until their bodies turned red. The geckos were then crushed into powder, which was applied to a woman's arm or other body parts. It was believed that if the woman engaged in sexual activity, the virginity sand would lose its color. Similar accounts appear in the Jin dynasty text Bouzhi by Zhang Hua. The supposed effectiveness of virginity sand likely stemmed from misunderstandings about pharmacology and bodily reactions. Nevertheless, such methods were exaggerated in literature and folklore, even giving rise to claims that emperors used virginity sand to test the chastity of their concubines. A related formula is documented in Song dynasty texts, such as Chen Shi's Essentials of Bedroom Arts. Known as Qin Shi Huang's formula for testing consorts, it included ingredients like myrobalan, dried rouge, cinnabar, and bat blood, which were mixed and applied to a woman's body. Similar to virginity sand, it was said that the color would fade if the woman had engaged in sexual activity, though the authenticity of these methods is questionable. Their mystique and dramatic nature ensured their place in ancient myths and novels, persisting for centuries. Method 5. Judging by eyebrows and breasts. In ancient China, a woman's eyebrows and breasts were also used as indicators of her chastity. In Romance of the Western Chamber, following Zhang Sheng and Yingying's first night together, Zhang Sheng sings the song Zhuansha, describing her as follows. Spring energy spreads across her delicate chest, and spring colors adorn her arched brows. Beneath the moonlight, her rosy cheeks shine more brightly than ever. Qing dynasty literary critic Jin Shengtan commented on these lines, stating, "Observe the chest and the brows, this meticulous observation reveals the marks of a newly deflowered maiden." Ancient beliefs held that a virgin's eyebrows were smooth and adhered closely to the skin, while those of a non-virgin were thought to stand upright and protrude from the skin. Similarly, a virgin's breasts were believed to be firm, perky, and elastic, while those of a non-virgin were described as sagging and lacking elasticity. These ideas were particularly prevalent during the Qing dynasty. In Notes from the Thatched Hall of Close Reading, Jiyun recorded a case where a man accused a young woman of losing her chastity after observing her brows and breasts, citing these features as evidence. The man even demanded that legal action be taken against the young man involved. However, others defended the pair, dismissing the accusation as baseless and the observations as subjective. This example illustrates that such notions were not isolated or imaginary but rather reflected a broader societal mindset of the time. These methods, despite their lack of scientific grounding, were widely accepted and perpetuated for generations. Method 6. Wrinkles at the corner of the eyes. In physiognomy, the corner of the eyes, specifically the crow's feet area, was often used to determine virginity. The judgment relied on observing the color of this area. If the corner appeared pink or slightly reddish, it indicated a recent loss of virginity. If the color was dark, it was considered evidence of a long-past loss of virginity. This method, however, was only applicable to young women. For older women with naturally darkened and wrinkled eye corners, it was deemed useless. Method 7. Midwives examining virginity. In ancient times, one of the more scientific methods for determining virginity was having a midwife, known as or childbirth assistant, examine a woman's genitalia. This approach primarily involved inspecting the hymen or other physical characteristics to make a judgment. Historical records suggest this practice had some parallels in modern gynecology, though ancient techniques were crude and highly subjective. For example, Emperor Huan of Han's first empress, Liang Nuiying, was reportedly subjected to such an examination before entering the palace. The midwife's process included observing behavior, assessing the woman's demeanor to determine if it aligned with perceived, pure, qualities. Facial complexion, using sunlight to observe the brightness and tone of her face. Symmetry of features, evaluating whether her facial features were harmonious and symmetrical. Genital examination, finally, checking the condition of her genitalia to confirm virginity. While these steps sound detailed, they lacked scientific grounding and were rooted in subjective observations. Compared to other methods such as physiognomy or the use of virginity powder, this approach appeared more reliable and was thus considered an authoritative validation at the time. Despite this, the practice was an intrusive intervention into women's bodily autonomy, steeped in feudalistic traditions. Method 8. Bloodstains as proof of virginity. In ancient society, translated as fallen red, was regarded as a critical marker for assessing a woman's virginity. On the wedding night, a white cloth was often placed on the bed to check for bloodstains after consummation. The appearance of fallen red was celebrated as proof of the bride's chastity. The next morning, the groom's family might deliver celebratory news to the bride's family, sometimes accompanied by congratulatory notes with phrases like, "The gates of purity uphold virtue, a virtuous woman deserves admiration." For the groom's family, fallen red symbolized family honor and could even become a point of public pride. The bride's family, in turn, saw it as a source of familial glory. This concept is reflected in literature. For instance, in Romance of the Western Chamber, after Zhang Sheng's intimate encounter with Cui Yingying, he wiped her fallen red with a handkerchief and admired the red stains, poetically exclaiming, "The silk as pure as fireflies glows white, soon marked with delicate rosy red delight." Here, rosy red serves as an allusion to fallen red. From a modern scientific perspective, this method is highly flawed. Not all women bleed during their first sexual experience, as the hymen can break for various reasons, such as vigorous physical activity or injury. Bloodstains are not definitive proof of virginity, as some women may resort to falsification. Historical records reveal that without access to modern hymen repair surgery, some brides who had lost their virginity employed creative methods to fake fallen red. Common tactics included preparing a white handkerchief stained with chicken blood in advance, filling a fish bladder with chicken blood, sealing it with string, and inserting it into the body to create the illusion of virginity. These deceptions undermined the authenticity of fallen red and diminished its significance over time. Some historians note that such practices highlight the immense pressures faced by women in ancient Chinese society, where their worth was often tied to notions of chastity and family honor. This is the History and Culture channel. Liking and subscribing are the greatest help and support to us. Thank you everyone and see you in the next time.